Well, let's change gear. I'll tell you about this story. I couldn't believe it, read it twice, but it is true. The National Health and Medical Research Council is called the NHMRC, and it's the federal government's preeminent grants body in the medical research space. Every year it allocates around $370 million of your money to research into diseases such as cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's and more. But in the latest round of the culture wars, from next year, these grants won't be awarded on merit alone. Instead, gender will be front and centre with a new requirement that grants must be awarded equally to male and female researchers. But that's not all, and I quote, "For the first time, non-binary researchers will also be explicitly included in this and other measures to foster gender equity in NHMRC funding, recognising, it says, the systemic disadvantage that they experience." Here I was naively thinking that scientists might actually respect the science of biology, if nothing else. Someone who has vast experience in how all of this works is distinguished scientist Georgia Trench, who joins me now from Brisbane. Georgia, thank you. You're a scientist. I clearly am not. I'm interested in government grants programs like this. I had a bit to do with NHMRC in my old life, but you received your first grant from them around 30 years ago. You're a woman and you've been continuously funded since that time. If that's your experience, what is the problem this new gender change is supposed to fix?
Well, the issue is that certainly there's a shortage of women in the senior leadership roles in NHMRC. There's no doubt about that. And I think that's largely a cohort or legacy issue. NHMRC have done a great deal in the last few years to address that. And so already there is much more equity in funding in the more senior levels. So to be honest, I'm not quite sure why we need any change to that. The system we have at the moment, I think, is working quite well.
Have you seen any bias against women or non-binary individuals in your scientific field?
Well, in terms of non-binary, that's only something that's been recently asked of people, and I haven't been reviewing in the last year or two, so I couldn't comment on that. In terms of women, absolutely not in my field, but I should preface that by saying I'm a geneticist, and genetics has always been very strong in women. There are other fields like public health where women have been very strong. So I can't speak for other areas, and I think it's quite possible there is some systemic bias in some of them, but I'm not sure that this is the right way to address it. And in my own experience, as I say, I've absolutely never seen that sort of bias.
Is there a risk if we're going to allocate funding to projects and proposals, medical research proposals, on any measure other than the merits of the proposal, that we're going to end up funding the wrong things because we're too busy or too concerned about numbers at the end of the year that have X number of men in one column and X number of women in the other?
Absolutely. I think that's definitely a concern. As I say, the methods that they're using at the moment do a little tinkering around the edges of the ranking, because there's no doubt about it, it's impossible to rank a set of grants perfectly. People's opinions differ, people's knowledge differs, and the ranking is therefore not perfect. And at the moment, they use a system called structural priority funding, which does a little tweaking at the edges to help fund more women. And I think that's fine, because they're still all excellent grants that are being funded. The worry is that when that goes a lot further, and they might actually be funding grants that are clearly less meritorious than some of the ones they don't fund.
You're a mother of two and one of your daughters is a geneticist in the UK. You say it's already hard enough to prove yourself as a female scientist and that gender quotas would send female scientists and women in general, and I 100% agree with you in terms of political quotas, back years. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I think there's several issues. One is the inevitable sniping that will result, both behind scenes and verbally, of she only got that because she's a woman. There are many fantastic female scientists in Australia who will get funded entirely on merit, and I don't think their efforts should be diminished in any way. I think women often suffer from imposter syndrome, and it'll only increase that. Women might themselves think, perhaps I only got that because I'm a woman. That's the last thing we need. I think if there is any misogyny in the field, it will only increase it. If you're a young man or man of any age who's narrowly missed out on funding year after year and seen your female peers around you who you think may not be quite as good, didn't score quite as well, get funded, I would think some misogyny is almost inevitable. So I think it can backfire in many different ways.
What sort of consultation was there with the people who drew up these rules for the NHMRC?
There was a lot of consultation, and sometime last year we were invited to go to a forum to discuss 4 different options that they were considering. But to me, all those 4 options were equally terrible. Suggestions I'd made at previous meetings had been dismissed, and so I didn't go to the forum. I couldn't see the point of voting for one of 4 terrible options. One of them was even to only allow institutes to put forward an equal number of grants for men and women. So tough luck to the public health institutes that are primarily women. I don't know what they would have done.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Georgia, thank you for speaking up on it tonight. I really appreciate your time.